was that daunting? I mean, you're taking on Greg Bear's work, and you're trying to translate that into something like a conclusion almost to the story.
Yeah, I mean, the way you described it right there, I probably should have been a little bit more daunted by what I was doing at the time.
The Halo universe is filled with wonder, mystery, and fascinating discoveries around every corner. With so much to explore, four friends decided it was about time that they boot up their consoles and discuss this universe that has grabbed their attention since childhood. JumperScape Audio kindly welcomes you to join them in the library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Library, the show where we talk about Halo lore on a new set. It's not that one back there. That one's still there. JumperScape sign.
Still there. Promise. We moved a little bit forward, that's all.
JumperScape sign. That's the important.
JumperScape sign.
Yes. But my friends, JumperScape.com as usual if you're going to get plugged into the community and all of that stuff. But the more important things are on the table today, including a whole novel. There's a novel on the table, literally. And it was written by today's guest, Mr. Jeremy Patenaude. It is an absolute honor to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me on, guys. This is a pleasure.
I'm so glad that it is. Of all the different stories that we've gotten to talk about so far, we've gotten to talk in the past with folks like Troy Denning and Kelly Gay and Matt Forbeck. And of all these authors, I admit I'm the most excited to talk to you today. And I'll tell you why. The reason why is because this is, as far as I'm aware, aside from short stories, you've made it into the novel world. This is your first novel.
Yes, it is my first novel.
You could have fooled me.
Really? Okay, well, that's awesome.
I will say Twitter has been, it looks like the reception for this has been relatively well. I've seen a bunch of other content creators in the Halo community really just singing your praises. So definitely good job on this one.
That puts a smile on my face. I'm glad. I mean, I'll be honest. I've been participating in the Halo community. I mean, since really day one, since November, 2001, I've been really involved in Halo. And so a big part of me when writing this book wanted to make sure that the people who were most pleased with it were the people who were fans of the franchise, that were people who were diehard. They knew the lore, they would see the connections, they would see the deep cuts. And so it gets me excited to hear that that's the case.
Well, you did do that in our book club among our own community. We have a book club of, there are apparently over 20 people who signed up. Not all of you show up, though, and I blame you all for it. We have a couple members in there that are in their 40s. They've been there since the beginning, like yourself. And those guys in particular love this novel. I think you really did accomplish your goal of writing for them. Because I'll tell you one thing. I know that maybe one of them will bring it up later because one of them did leave a question for you, which stick around to the end to get those questions. But one of them actually compared your work to Eric Nyland, said that your writing style was very, very similar and accomplished a lot of what he did, like such as space battles, which we haven't seen a whole lot of in a long time.
Yeah, no, space battles, it was definitely on the docket. And I think anyone who's familiar with the early novels in the franchise, there was an emphasis placed on naval combat and naval warfare and these really large scale bombastic battles that are scientifically not feasible, but really exciting and fun to be, participating in. And so I know that part of my thinking when going into this book was that needs to be an element. And one of the characters kind of lends itself to that. A character who's sort of customized specifically for that aspect of the storytelling that I think harkens back to a lot of Eric's work, not only in the early Halo novels, but in his short story in Evolution. So yeah, that's really humbling to hear because I know that he takes a priority place among fans with regard to the novels.
Essentially, what people would call the author of the Bible in terms of in terms of how Halo canon goes. But that's the thing. When we're talking about Halo canon, I mean, you've been there since the very early days, since when 343 wasn't even called 343. What was it like back during that time when you were with 343, from the beginning all the way up until your eventual departure, working with folks like Jeff and Ken? Managing the franchise must have been, I mean, to say that it was daunting would be putting it lightly, I would assume.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I first came on board, we were in an interesting space because I think I first had a conversation with somebody about possibly coming on board in 2008, but it really kind of materialized in the middle of 2009, just before they announced the name of the studio was going to be 343 Industries. And when I got there, it was a handful of 25, 30 people. And at the time, like I said, it was interesting because Bungie was still continuing their course. They had not yet released Halo Reach. Halo 3 ODST came out actually at the end of 2000, I think it was 2009, and Halo Reach came out in 2010. And so it was an interesting baton passing period for me, someone who's been, a longtime fan in the trenches, pretty active in the Halo community, since there was a community, which was around 2000, late 2001, early 2000, or I should say 2002 is when it started to pick up. And so it was an interesting time to be on the team. But it's one of those things where, I think you can try to imagine how it would be, but a lot of it's not exactly what you think. There's a lot of long days working on things that are relatively mundane, like, summarizing Halo 2 or 3 or something like that. And so I think initially it was kind of cool because I was brought onto a lot of really interesting projects, but most of my focus was on communicating to the broader consumer base, many people who haven't yet been exposed to the lore. And we were about 6 or 7 years into, 2001 to 2009. So we're looking at 8 years into the franchise's life. And so there was a lot of stuff that had been released. But then after I joined, the pace at which we released books and content increased exponentially. And so I got to go along with that ride, from, encyclopedias to guidebooks. And then I would say about 2 or 3 years into my time there, I transitioned, maybe it was less than 3 years, probably about 1.5 to 2 years. I transitioned from my role as a kind of like a community writer, Waypoint writer, into the position where I was with for most of my time there, which was a franchise writer, and was on that team when it was just me, Kevin Grace, and Corinne Robinson. And slowly over the years, we kind of added different folks, Ken and Jeff, you mentioned. And so I got to work with a really, really great group of folks who loved the IP, loved the franchise, and really wanted to do the fans right by it. And so a lot of the work that I did there was either managing like the large scale lore, in terms of the story Bible, and making sure the lines all connected, and where there wasn't connections because of, miscommunications prior to me coming on board or whatever it might be, trying to make a connection work there. And I think the main focus of our work was that, but also the publishing aspect, getting with the authors and working hand in hand with them so that they could execute really well on the novels that they were telling, the corner of the universe that we had carved out for them. And that was essentially my work between those two things, connecting the inner workings of the IP, the franchise with different products we were working on, whether it was a game or a book or a comic, and also collating all that data in one sort of large repository that you guys would refer to as the Halo Story Bible. But that was just this massive database of material, from images to, text and stuff like that. So that was essentially my role there while I was, I would say the 13.5 years that I was there, most of it was spent doing that kind of stuff.
It's all, like I said, daunting would be putting it lightly. I do have to give you so much credit though to stuff that I interacted with in my childhood, being honest with you, because I mean, we're talking about all this stuff that you contributed to, and I'm thinking about classic Waypoint days, back when Waypoint had its own app, and it was dedicated to showing all of your information from your time in Halo. And I mean, one thing that comes to mind is vintage fisticuffs, which I'm fairly certain you did have a hand in.
Oh yeah, vintage fisticuffs was my baby, one of my babies for sure. I did a few of those things, like a different way to campaign. And vintage fisticuffs were these little videos, that were deep cuts back when the cut wasn't even that deep, to be perfectly honest, because it was so early in the franchise, 2010, 2011. But very fond of those because they represent me being a fan on the inside of the curtain. And they let me do something that I know that it appealed to people who loved Halo, but there's not really a strong argument for broad appeal with vintage fisticuffs, showing the great combat sequences in the Halo campaigns. So that was a blast. I really enjoyed that time.
And now you have to satisfy some curiosity for me, because there's one particular show from Waypoint. And given that you had some involvement in Waypoint, I'm hoping you can answer this question for me, because there's one show in particular. I don't know if you remember it by any chance, but it eventually went to the Halo Reach Top 5, but it's called the Halo 3 Top 5, hosted by two dudes, Ecotech and Skizmark. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that. I wasn't directly involved in that. That was another side project from a bunch of guys that were in the studio. And I don't know that I can release their information or give their motivation for that, but
darn, because I was sitting there, I was like, where are they now? I was hoping for a where are they now portion, because I've missed them for so long. I thought they were hilarious.
Yeah.
And then one day the show ended and we never heard from them again.
What they figured out was, so there needed to be a way in which we could show cool content that fans were sending us, coupled with a language like spoken in a way that the community would understand. So machinima at the time was how they did that, kind of riding in the wake of Red versus Blue and that group. And so I think that they just really wanted to present, cool content from the fans in a fan servicey kind of way. And the studio was small back then, so you're talking about a group of the team that made that was literally three. Somebody who put the videos together and the two folks who were doing the VO for it. So I mean, it was a great time to have content like that was low reaching fruit, I think, but something that fans really appreciated it because it spoke their language. And so, that was cool, but I'm not going to release any more information about that
that's fair.
I've forgotten a lot of it. That was a long time ago. And B, that was not, I did not have a part in that. I was able to watch that as an audience member and enjoy it for what it was.
Well, I'm still glad that you got to, being real, I have a lot of excitement talking to somebody who was there whenever it was I would say when Waypoint was at its absolute peak, with how much content was going in there. And it was a combination of community and personal involvement, and you're right. It spoke to the right people, and it was just it. Thank you. That's the easiest way that I could put it. My brain's going to get all jumbled there.
So much. I miss Waypoint so much.
Yeah, but now we got to bring it home here, because I do think that there's a reasonable jump here that some people might have missed. Some may or may not know, with the short story that you wrote, the Untitled one. Which this would mean it's not your first time in Empty Throne writing for canon characters. You had already written a story on behalf of Bornstellar and telling more about his story. I want to start there. Was that daunting? I mean, you're taking on Greg Bear's work and you're trying to translate that into something like a conclusion almost to the story.
Yeah, I mean, the way you described it right there, I probably should have been a little bit more daunted by what I was doing at the time. I got to work with Greg Bear, who was a masterful storyteller, and I'm grateful that I got to spend some time with him. Mainly, a little bit on, mostly it was on Primordium and Silentium, but a little bit on Cryptum. But he is a great storyteller, and I think what was going on in my mind when we were working on that anthology, I think that was Fractures, if I'm not mistaken, is I just wanted to not necessarily tie all the loose ends together, but kind of create an interesting dynamic that that all of Greg's work was kind of funneling into, which was this idea that the Forerunners had their own hopes and dreams. They had their own idea of what the great journey was, and you get some of that in the Covenant's mistranslations of the Forerunner, language, and that they were drawing from something that was real and true, even if they misinterpreted it. And so I think the way I approached that story was, how would we want to close this arc, even if it's not forever. I mean, I don't know what they're planning on doing with it now. Maybe nothing. Maybe it stays in this holding pattern forever. But how would we make this story kind of come to a point where there's a sense of resonance for the characters, but also it's not a situation where it completely closes down and, everyone's dead and there's no future possibility, no open, endedness to it that allows people to be creative down the road. So yeah, I mean, it was there was a level of dauntingness to it, but I think overall it was me trying to create a situation where it didn't feel so much like an ellipsis and more like people could rest there, like it could sit there for a long time or, forever if need be, and people would be content with it. I mean, at least I hope. I don't really, again, I try to not look at a lot of the critiques or the criticisms or anything like that. So I don't know how it was received necessarily, but I think I felt really confident that this was where he needed to go. It needed to be something simple, something compelling, something that reached really deep into the heart of what his story was, which was the Halo rings and how he got caught up in the drama around them, and had some sense of rest for him as the character. I think you get a sense that he's at peace where he is.
I think you did a really good job telling that conclusion in that way, because I think hopping off of Promises to Keep, especially, which is in many ways a philosophical thriller almost. Yeah. I mean, you did a good job, I would say, of taking on a challenge of trying to tell a conclusion to a story that basically already had its own conclusion in a way. It was like it was like an epilogue to the conclusion sort of thing.
That's right.
And I loved it. And you said that you've avoided a lot of that stuff, which makes sense. But I can tell you from what I've seen out there trying to keep my pulse on the things and all that, it has been received with nothing but praise. It has been one of the, I mean, in terms of how I've heard many people talk about various different stories and writings out there in Halo canon, it's one of the most accepted because it tells a story that people really wanted to hear, which, I mean, Born Stellar and Chant, obviously, so.
Yeah.
But they also just wanted more Born Stellar, and they got it. So that was like a double whammy. You brought back a character everyone wanted, and you told the story that everyone wanted to hear about him.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. I mean, if you look at Born Stellar's origin, like when you first interact with him on in Cryptum, when he goes to the Jamankan crater and he's looking for the didact, you get a sense that there's a part of who he is that yearns, at least I did, that yearns to live in a more simple, natural realm. Even if it's expressed in a kind of adolescent way. And so to have him, on a farm somewhere outside the galaxy, in a position where he can contemplate all that's happened, I think was, yeah. I mean, I think it was the way that I thought it kind of pulls all of the different aspects of who he is into this place where he can actually sit and repose and think about all that he's been a part of, the mistakes he's made, the things that he tried to do that were good, and reflect on that. So I'm glad to hear that people thought it was okay.
I mean, all the thought that you're putting into the character. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that I wouldn't be surprised about all of that praise, because now you're jumping into I would say it's a much bigger thing. I mean, you obviously have a method down. You know how to take your observations about a character and turn it into something that is both accurate to the character, but also tells a whole new thing. And that's what we get a whole lot of in Empty Throne. You took on so many characters. Was that something that you were initially planning for? Or was this just like, what if I threw him in there? Oh, he's probably around here. Oh, this guy's probably here too. I should
Yeah, so I mean, I think from the very beginning of when I first set out for that book, I already had the main the two characters on the front cover. I kind of had that narrative down in my mind, not in the exact form that it appeared, but in an early iteration of it, years prior to us even talking about Empty Throne. I'm talking about like circa like 2014 or something like that. Those two characters, so Big Gem and Chloe, which doesn't give away any spoilers, but you said there might be spoilers at the end. I don't know.
For now, we'll say that it's spoiler free. When we get to the questions that the audience has, then everyone that's listening has their spoiler warning.
So, I mean, I think Big Jim and Chloe doesn't give anything away about who they are.
Nope, not even a little bit.
So, yeah, I mean, I had that story already in my mind, and the three other individuals were kind of forming in my mind when I was working on the encyclopedia. That was the last major project before Empty Throne that I worked on. It was like a year and a half of very, very challenging, very engrossing work to try to pull that book together, which is, essentially the story Bible, at least the parts of it that we were able to publish. And during that time, some of these ideas kind of populated, like thinking about different characters who would have roots that would go back into the early days of the franchise, the early days of the universe, with regard to, characters in Halo 2 and characters in, mentioned in Halo: The Fall of Reach and Contact Harvest. And so that kind of, those four main characters, the four main point of views that you get in Empty Throne were things that were already, when we were starting the book, I was ready to, interact with those characters. But I would say some of the individuals, so you'll notice some chapters in the beginning and some chapters at the end, some of that stuff I wrote a year or two earlier for other projects. And before I even started Empty Throne as something else. And we as we were working on developing Empty Throne, a lot of these things, these pieces that had been floating out there extraneously, Jeff was like, I think we should include this chapter, and I think we should include this piece that you did here. And so working with Jeff and Alex on the franchise team, we kind of put a few different point of views at the beginning and at the end that I wasn't expecting when I went through my first draft, let's just put it that way. But that fit well given the nature of the story and where it starts. So I won't give away any more than that, but let's just put it this way. There's a lot of characters in there. The more characters you have, the harder it is to land a plane, because you have to have the threads all matching up and in sync, and then you have to have them land and resolve at the same time. So maybe my next book, whatever that is, will be, I'll do one character or two or something like that.
I mean, I do remember very well, immediately after the reveal that happened at HCS, there were so many people in various creator circles, in our book club, out there in the internet. People were filled with so much doubt, because they're like, how can you have so many characters and tell a consistent, very, centered, focused story? The answer is right there in the book. You got to read it, because there's something very nice in there about how you did it. Because you're talking about this whole, more characters you add, the harder it is to land the plane. I think that just off of the reading experience, just without, and likewise not trying to do any spoilers or anything like that, but just trying to go through it, reading through it, I really like what you did, where it starts almost ominously like slower, going in and establishing everyone that we need to know about, and then it's all happening there at the end. Yeah. It's just everything culminates into this. I would say it's probably one of the way that I had felt when I was reading it felt very similar to that of listening to a cutscene, especially there at the end. It felt like a traditional Halo story was buried underneath, inside of a more grandiose 343 domain story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love that. I think that you did fantastic trying to juggle all these characters. In fact, it didn't even really feel like juggling. It just felt like it was everyone was in a single file line and everyone was organized.
Well, I'm glad it looks that way on the other end of the process. No. I mean, I really appreciate the kind words there. there is something really, really fun about having these 4 different characters doing this dance throughout the course of the book. And, they have this single sort of minded view. Each of them have their own motivations. They're driven by their own, past that's haunting them or driving them. But they're all tangled up in this one arc, and they're all headed towards this one point where there's something's going to happen, and it's not going to be good for some people, and it's going to be really good for others, or maybe mediocre for others, depending on how you see it. But like there's this sense in which they're going to have this collision, and you want to see exactly, like, my hope was that as I'm pulling these things together, that the audience really wants to see what's going to happen at the very end and how all these threads are going to be resolved. And I know that in the process, we open up a lot of new threads, which was also part of my thinking behind this book. When we first started talking about this book, really it was our consumer products team, the manager from that team, John Friend, had asked about us having a book that would function sort of as an onboarding mechanism post Halo Infinite. And the reason why is because we had a lot of new players that came on board during that time, and a lot of them weren't really familiar. They weren't read up on, the Halo lore. And, you could ask them to read, the 30 odd books that we have, or we could try to create a product that would catch them up to speed and not only give them an understanding of what's happened in the past, as early as the Fall of Reach and Contact Harvest, these sort of the novels that prefaced the game experience, but also like to create this new generation of characters and heroes that will take the baton into the next novels, whatever they are. And so that was the question that was in my mind when they were proposing this idea of having an onboarding or some sort of on-ramp novel. And initially it started off very simple. I was like, okay, so we'll have a new generation of Spartans that have some sort of connection with, the last generation. And then I realized, okay, that's probably not going to work. What we need something that's got a little bit of a deeper cut, deeper roots of these characters. And along the way, I think it became a little bit more complex, but along the way, I realized that I'm tapping into, really the heart of some of the Halo experiences people have had in the past. In Halo 2, for example, there's one of the 4 characters has a very deep tie to a major character in Halo 2. And I think when it's revealed, it's kind of unexpected that this character has that kind of relationship, or even if that character had progeny, like we're like, okay, where did that come from? But I thought it was helpful in tying together 2 parts of the universe that have kind of dangled apart from each other. The stuff that happened in the early years, Halo 1, Halo 2, and Halo 3, and the things that 343 Industries or the Halo Studios were working on, starting with 4, 5, and 6. And so in that way, that's kind of the way I was thinking about some of these characters, is that I wanted to bridge that gap and create this launch point that allowed the Halo team to really go any place that they wanted to go with these new characters. And the characters themselves already have this historic resonance because they have connections to the beginning of Halo in a lot of ways. So that was kind of the objective and goal, which is probably why it was why it was such a large project and a large book.
Well, it was totally worth the effort and the amount of thought that you put into making that happen, because I would totally agree. For those that are listening, I totally agree. This book is as a person who has been there since the beginning, this is a perfect book to start off on if you're just trying to catch up and you just want to know what's going on and what could be happening next. I would confidently say you could probably, I would say, essential reading now, because there is an essential reading list in my mind, right? You've got the original Bungie books, and then you got Empty Throne. You could add on Greg Bear's trilogy if you'd like, if you want to really get into some of the Forerunner nitty-gritty. But this book, I'd say, Jeremy, you nailed it. This is the quintessential reading that people are going to need stepping into the next part of Halo.
I'm really glad to hear that. That makes me excited, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the Halo team does with it going forward.
Dude, we all are. Which, we do have some reactions. Spoiler warning has been issued. All of you should be aware of this now.
Oh, okay.
We've gotten 2 questions that need answer before we wrap up for the day. One from one of those guys that I just mentioned, one of the older hands around here in our community and book club and all that. He left you a letter, and we have another one of our listeners, community members, book club members, what you want to call them, from overseas that had another question for you. So, are you ready for a whole letter?
I was reading it over your shoulder while you guys were talking. It's a good one.
So, the letter is as follows. This is from where we name, not we. This guy likes to change his username depending on what book we're reading for that week, and we've been doing book club 2 weeks in a row for Empty Throne because there's too much to talk about. And he named himself Game of Empty Thrones.
There we go.
He writes and then asks later on, to the audience, this contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk. Dear Mr. Patenaude, how dare you? How dare you? I mean, just who do you think you are, writing such an amazing book? What makes you think you can just bring back classic Halo storytelling reminiscent of the days when Eric Nyland was writing for Halo with naval ship-to-ship combat scenes we haven't had in years, and then to also bring back so many old tidbits of lore like Oni codenames Surgeon, Coal Miner, and Fixer, and then reveal they happen to be Octavio Morales, previously seen in the I Love Bees audio drama, and Jalan El Signy, last seen in Contact Harvest, but leaving Fixer's identity still a mystery. And then, of course, you bring back Spartan Grey Team, Admirals Hood and Osman, and the much-loved AI Black Box, only to submit BB to Final Dispensation instead of saving him with the domain, crying. And then you have the audacity to reveal that James 005 survived the invasion of Reach and was Kurt Ambrosed, quote-unquote, into service for Oni, only to send him out with a bang a la 1987's The Predator? And then on top of all of that, you introduce new and interesting characters like Abigail Cole, Severin, and Dovo Nesto, all while bringing back the threat of the Covenant, putting Earth in the crosshairs of the Banished, and throwing in a winner-takes-all race for Foreigner technology? My heart can't take it. And let's not even mention the adjunct. Wow! Dawa Madhu indeed. In all seriousness, this was a great entry into the Halo canon that the community will be talking about for years to come, and you should be immensely proud of yourself. Also, love the reference to the poem Ozymandias and its symbolism with the fate of the ship bearing the same name. Very well done. So, now, after all of that, my only question is, when can we expect a Big Jim trilogy of the missions he undertook from the time he was revived by Oni leading up to the events of Empty Throne?
Oh, that would be rad. That would be really cool. Yeah, that's going to be a Halo Studios question. That'll be a question for Jeff or for Alex. I think, the one thing about it that would make me be like, okay, would that be? I mean, that would be cool, but keep in mind, like, his whole sort of disposition in that story in Empty Throne is one of regret and sorrow and wanting to. He's a very before Chloe gets into his life, he's very, very, very dire and so it would be interesting, I think, and compelling to see him, blow up frigates like he does in this story. But I'd be curious if there would be much of an emotional arc for him. I think that might be a cool video game, though. I mean, I could see a really awesome video game where you're, Black Ops Spartan, and you're on these PMC operations for Oni, and you're doing stuff like he does at the very beginning of Empty Throne. So yeah, I think that would be fast. In fact, that whole sequence where he basically takes down a convoy of frigates single-handedly was actually part of a proposed game project at one point in the studio's history. It was an idea that I had for, a team had the idea, generally speaking, but like I kind of put together the pieces for a final mission where you would basically go from one frigate. At the time, this would have been too resource intensive, so it's probably why we didn't execute on it. But basically taking down a bunch of frigates single-handedly with, an EVA outfit, a suit that could allow you to go from one frigate to the next. So I think that would be an awesome game. I'm wondering if he would have the character arc necessary for that to be a novel. Maybe a short story, I don't know, or a series of short stories.
I think we'll take it. We've already heard that comment so many times that specific scene would have been a great video game. So clearly, whoever, if it was your idea, if it was someone else's idea, whoever's idea it was a great one.
Yeah, that was a cool idea. I think like it's when you're involved in game development, a lot of things are thought up of and put on whiteboards, and they either other ideas win out, or you have resources that you can't really spend on everything that you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's an important aspect of game design that we bring up all the time, that people need to keep in mind, that there are in fact limitations that we have to live by. That we might have just now gotten quantum computing, but it wasn't there before. That's for sure.
That's right.
So I'm just glad that one way or another, it's here in the novel. It's a great scene, and plus, since we're here in spoiler territory, I am such a huge fan of basically James Winter soldiering and Janissary. That was just great.
Yeah,
big fan.
That was a blast to write. That was actually one of the easiest parts to write, because I think it's really easy, I think, for people who've played Halo to visualize what that would be like.
And very much so.
Yeah.
And plus, I mean, we always like the idea of OG, like real true Spartan, absolutely bodying a fake. So that's great to me.
There you go.
Now we got one last question for you, and then we will, let you back doing whatever it is you're doing. Like, obviously you're writing the next novel. That's what we all want. So anyway, next question is from Maximum Capacity Throne.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Large throne.
Firstly, I'd like to second Guyver's statement and take my hat off to you for creating such an enjoyable story. I did not have this much fun reading a Halo novel since the original trilogy. So many tidbits and tie-ins to other stories that really have put this book easily into my top 3, maybe even higher. My question is, what was the motivation/inspiration of having Spartan, I believe, Merrick turning traitor? And are you planning on exploring that more? Also curious to know if you always envisioned bringing Grey Team back into this story, or if there was any other ideas such as Blue Team or remnants of another Spartan 2 team.
Grey Team was, we weren't really thinking about it. Well, let me rewind that a little bit. In earlier versions, there was the possibility of having Spartan Force directly from Infinity, but I really wanted Grey Team to be part of this book because I love them. I think they're great characters, and I think the more that I thought about the full arc of the story, the more I thought it made more sense, and also set up really cool opportunities for the future with regard to Tool Jiran and some of the interactions that are later. And it let her go on her arc as well. Having Grey Team there created an interesting dynamic, because they're not Spartan 3s or 4s, they're Spartan 2s, and they have a unique sort of profile and personality that I think was necessary for Jiran's character to an encounter, for her to go on her arc. But that being said, Merrick, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to create a clear picture of how deep Dovo Nesto's hands were in his enemies. And I think you get a real good picture of his power. I mean, who he is ultimately is obviously up to the Halo Studios team. I left a lot of really interesting, I think, question marks about who his character might be. The one thing I wanted to communicate was that no one is safe from his manipulations. This isn't just a situation where, you've got the prophets telling the elites, oh, the Forerunners are gods, you have to worship them. And this is a situation where humanity is infected by the possibility that they could have some sort of inside line to whatever Nesto's doing. And I think when you have a character like a Spartan who is compromised, and obviously this is not the first Spartan 4 to have this situation. There's others that have been in the past. But to have a Spartan compromised like this really does communicate the depth of Dovo Nesto's power and control. Even though things go a little sideways for him by the end of the story, he has, it's clear that he is a mastermind. And he is playing a long game. He's been playing a long game for a very long time, it seems. And and it seems like he gets what he wants most of the time. Didn't quite pan out the way he wanted it to with Severin, but I think showing that his infiltrations with both the Shadow of Intent and with humanity's Spartan, element shows that he's a master manipulator.
You did a good job of that. I think he was probably one of the most compelling villains we've had in a while. So I would just say that, like I said already, you nailed the characters, you nailed the storytelling. This was just a knock it out of the park sort of situation. So I think that's, honestly, I only have one more question for you. That's just my own thing, and then we can take it there, because I think a lot of people are starting to see. I mean, you just heard it. Some people are putting this up there in their top threes now. They're saying that you're one of the best authors that Halo's ever seen. That this is one of the best novels that the book franchise in particular has seen. So, putting off some of that off of you, then, how about you? You've been in this franchise for a while, but you've been a fan for even longer. Favorite author, favorite book series? Do you have any of those?
Oh, wow. Well, so first off, I love, the authors that I got to work with were a blast. We talked about Greg Bear earlier, but I worked a lot with Troy Denning and a lot with Kelly Gay. Love those guys. They are amazing writers, and it was a real blessing to work with both of them. I enjoyed Nyland's stuff way back in the early days. I mean, that was Halo for people who were reading the novels. And I think my favorite novel of all the stories was really Joseph Staten's Contact Harvest. And the reason why I say that is because he, and maybe some of this came out in Empty Throne, but he really created a sense of vibrancy in the universe in terms of the depth that he depicted every character and really every culture and tradition. So you get glimpses at the Jiralhanae, you get insights into the entire covenant, the prophets and their manipulation of the different species, and then you also get Oni and this far-flung colony that is trying to figure out life out in the outer reaches of human-occupied space. But at the same time, there's a real sense of grounding in Halo by taking the main character, Sergeant Johnson, is this character everybody knows, and making it immediately accessible. So to me, there was a lot of things that Staten was juggling when he wrote that book. But I found it to be the most compelling with regard to world building and character building. And I say that because obviously it's Joseph Staten. He was the guy who came up with, him and the other folks from Bungie were the guys who came up with the idea for Halo, and he was driving the story for the most part. So I think that shows in his writing, is that he was eating and drinking and breathing Halo 24/7. And so when he went to put a novel together, all of that came out, and it comes out naturally. And this is not a slight at all on external authors. I think having the external authors is vital and essential, because they bring something that the people who are working directly on the property can't. They have new ideas, they have new perspectives, and those are all super helpful. But there was something about that book that showed that he was kind of there at the beating heart of the universe, the Halo universe. And he was there with, in the story Bible every day, trying to figure things out and tell, new stories in the IP. And I think you get that when you read Contact Harvest. And so I think some of my thinking with Empty Throne was to express that, to give a sense of the depth. And I'll be honest, I mentioned this in another conversation I had. I'm surprised they let me get away with as much as I did. I started this book while I was still there. I started to pull together the outline and to come with some of the manuscript and the story ideas. And then I transferred off the team, and they let me finish the project, which I'm very honored that they did. But I was thinking, when I sent this over, I was like, there's no way they're going to let this or this or this, but they did. And they can't take it back now. That's the thing. It's
you're stuck.
Published.
You're stuck. I think a lot of people are happy you're stuck, though.
There you go. Yeah. So, there's a lot of stuff that I was being experimental, seeing how far we could push it. And I'm glad that we did, because I think it turned out to be a really great story. And so I'm grateful for especially the Halo teams, Jeff and Alex helped a lot out with kind of navigating some stuff towards the end of the development that I needed help with resolution on. So I'm grateful for those guys as well.
Fantastic. Well, you have been a utter honor to have on with us, sir. Thank you so much for joining us, and more importantly, for writing this. I think many of us would probably be wanting to thank you in person if we could. But it has been a pleasure to read this. It has been a pleasure to speak with you. Is there anything coming up soon in your world that people can look forward to hearing from you soon about? Is it new writings? Is it other stuff you're working on? Is there anything you want to mention that folks can look forward to?
Yeah, I'm working on some other stuff. I've got right now. I'm working on a game project with a friend who I got to work with on Halo 4 and Halo 5, and he's working on a game, and it's really cool. And so I'm excited about that. Most of my time is spent doing that, and so you guys will see it when you see it. That's all that I can say about that.
Hey, that's fine. That's fine with me. New games, new studios, all down for it. I'm always down for something like that. Well, thank you again for joining us, and you, dear listener, as well, for joining us. If you want to pick this up, I found mine on so many different things. I found mine on Amazon. I got an audio copy on Google Play and Audible. I'm out here collecting them like the Infinity Stones. So you're going to need to just go and find it yourself. Go and follow Jeremy Patenaude and anything he's doing. And otherwise, thank you one last time, Mr. Patenaude, for joining us. And for those of you at home, next week, we're not going to be doing another guest. We've had a little bit of a spree every now and then, but today and for the next week, we're going to actually be going back into our usual thing of just kicking back for a little bit, talking about what's going on right now with various entries to the lore, including Empty Throne, and it's stuff that you can look forward to. So thank you guys so much for listening. Go to JumperScape.com if you want to get plugged in there, joining our community and in the book club to read books like this. And otherwise, we will see you then. Thank you guys so much for listening.
The library was produced and published by JumperScape Audio. Funding was provided by our fantastic patrons on Patreon. If you enjoy the show and wish to support JumperScape's future projects or get some sweet benefits, join our Patreon at patreon.com/JumperScape or become part of this truly special community at discord.gg/JumperScape. Thank you for your listenership, and we hope you enjoyed.